On a cold and silent Christmas Eve, the sky hung heavy with clouds, casting a gray hush over the quiet neighborhood where Maria lived with her infant twins, Lily and Lucas. The streets, lined with glistening snow, sparkled faintly under the soft glow of holiday lights, but inside Maria's modest two-story home, warmth radiated. The fireplace crackled gently, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Maria had just put her 6-month-old twins to sleep in their shared crib, tucking them in beneath handmade blankets from her late mother. She stood for a moment in the doorway of their room, her heart full as she watched their tiny chests rise and fall. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and a peaceful silence blanketed the evening. Maria was filled with gratitude, despite the hardships she'd faced. It had been a difficult year, balancing 2 jobs, navigating single motherhood, and surviving on little sleep, but moments like these made it all worth it. The Christmas tree stood tall in the living room, trimmed with ornaments she'd saved from childhood and a few new ones she'd bought just for the twins' first Christmas. She had wrapped a few small gifts and placed them under the tree, smiling at the thought of what future Christmas mornings would be like as Lily and Lucas grew older. Her heart swelled with love and quiet hope. It was nearly midnight when she finally drifted off to sleep on the couch, the soft hum of carols playing from the old radio on the shelf. But the peace of the night shattered in an instant. A loud, violent cracking noise jolted her awake, followed by the pungent smell of smoke. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but then she saw the orange glow dancing along the walls and heard the unmistakable roar of flames. Panic surged through her. She leapt to her feet, calling out for her babies as she ran toward their room. But the hallway was already thick with smoke, and heat radiated through the walls like an invisible wall of fire. She screamed their names, her voice raw with terror, but the flames had already consumed the far end of the house. She tried to push forward, coughing, eyes burning, but the fire blocked her path. Heat licked at her skin and the air was thick, unbreathable. In a frenzy, she ran to the front of the house, hoping to break in from outside, but before she could reach the door, the floor buckled beneath her and she collapsed onto the icy porch. Neighbors had seen the blaze and rushed to help. Someone dragged her away from the inferno just as another explosion from within sent a fireball into the air. The world spun. Sirens wailed in the distance, and snow began to fall again, melting as it touched the raging flames. At the hospital, Maria awoke with burns on her arms and face, her lungs raw from smoke inhalation. But nothing compared to the searing pain in her chest when the fire chief gently told her that the firefighters hadn't been able to reach the nursery in time. They had found no survivors inside. Her babies, her heart, her reason for waking each morning, were gone. The room swam before her as she screamed, her body racked with sobs that no one could console. The world dimmed, the season's joy snuffed out in a cruel twist of fate. From that night forward, Christmas was no longer a celebration. It became an anniversary of loss, a time of unbearable remembrance. Every year, as carols played in shops and snow-dusted rooftops, Maria retreated into herself, haunted by the crackle of flames and the cries she could no longer hear. Her dreams became nightmares, and her once bright home stayed dark and cold. No amount of time could ease the wound of losing her twins, or so she believed. The days that followed the fire passed in a blur for Maria, wrapped in a thick fog of grief and disbelief. She moved through each hour like a ghost of herself, numb and detached, her body functioning only because it had to. She refused food. She barely spoke. The nurses at the hospital would gently encourage her to rest, but how could she sleep when every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames licking the crib rails, heard the screams she could never silence, and smelled the smoke that now seemed forever embedded in her skin. Her arms, burned and bandaged, ached not just from injury but from emptiness. They had once cradled her babies, held their soft bodies close, soothed their cries in the middle of the night. Now they were empty, and so was she. The funeral was brief, too brief. There were no small bodies to lay to rest, only tiny urns filled with ashes that didn't make sense to her mind. Maria couldn't even look at them. She couldn't believe they were real. How could those ashes be Lily and Lucas? They had just learned to giggle. They had just begun to reach out for her face, their fingers wrapping around hers like lifelines. They had just existed. Her friends tried to offer comfort, saying the things people say in times of tragedy, that her children were angels now, that God had a plan, that time would heal her. But their words felt hollow, even cruel. No plan could justify the loss of her babies. No God she could understand would allow her to hold them one moment and lose them the next in a blaze of fire and agony. After she was discharged from the hospital, Maria couldn't return to the remains of her home. It had been reduced to blackened rubble, the walls collapsed inward, the roof scorched and broken. The nursery was gone, nothing left but a charred spot where the crib once stood. She stayed with her sister for a while, but even that became unbearable. Her sister had children, a boy and a girl around the same age Lily and Lucas would have been, and every giggle, every tantrum, every bedtime story was a knife in Maria's chest. She tried to smile, to be polite, but inside she was crumbling. She would sit awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of breathing from the other rooms, imagining how her life was supposed to sound. The coos of babies, the patting of tiny feet, the soft calls for "Mama." Instead, there was silence, and it roared. Eventually, Maria moved away. She packed what little was left, photographs, a blanket that had escaped the fire, a locket that held a lock of each baby's hair, and left the town that had become a graveyard of memories. She didn't tell many people where she was going. She just needed to disappear. The grief didn't lessen with distance, but at least she could walk down the street without someone recognizing her as the mother who lost her twins in the fire. In the new city, she rented a small apartment with one bedroom and no nursery. She found work at a bookstore, where the quiet comfort of stories helped her breathe again, if only in small moments. Still, every holiday season brought it all back: the fire, the screaming, the devastating silence that followed. She often found herself wandering at night, unable to sleep. She'd walk through city streets wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, watching other families through their windows. Parents laughing with their children. Trees lit up. Stockings hanging. And in every child's face, she imagined Lily or Lucas. What would they look like now? Would Lily still have that little swirl of hair over her forehead? Would Lucas have his father's dimples? She would sometimes see twins and feel the air leave her lungs, only to remind herself that her twins were gone. Grief was no longer a wave, it was an ocean, and she was always beneath it. Learning how to breathe underwater. She joined a grief support group for a while, hoping that talking might help, but most people there had lost spouses, parents, or siblings, not children. And certainly not two children, both infants, both stolen in the same instant. She sat through the meetings silently, her hands clenched in her lap, barely able to say her name. When she did finally speak, it was only to say, they were only 6 months old. I didn't get enough time. And then she cried. Not the quiet, restrained kind of weeping that people do in public. She cried the kind of cry that breaks open your ribs and leaves you empty. The kind of cry that has no words and no end. In her loneliest moments, Maria wondered if she was being punished. For what, she didn't know. Maybe for working too much, for leaving them in their cribs while she dozed off, for not reaching them in time. The guilt wrapped around her like a second skin, whispering cruel lies into her ear each day. People told her it wasn't her fault, that she had done everything she could, but their words couldn't erase the truth she believed in her heart, that a mother should protect her children at all costs. And she had failed. Year after year passed, but she couldn't bring herself to pack away the few mementos she had left. She kept the locket on a chain around her neck. The blanket stayed folded at the end of her bed. A photograph, burned at the edge but still intact, remained on her dresser, the only image she had of the three of them together. And when December rolled around, she avoided stores, music, decorations, anything that reminded her of Christmas, the day that had once promised joy and instead brought unthinkable sorrow. Maria never stopped grieving, she simply learned how to carry it. And while to the outside world she looked like a woman moving on, going to work, paying bills, smiling politely, inside she remained frozen in time, a mother forever stuck on Christmas Eve, haunted by the memory of her babies and the fire that took them. Though time moved forward, Maria remained quietly suspended in the moment her life was cleaved in two. After moving to a new city, she didn't tell people much about her past. She introduced herself simply, Maria, a bookseller, someone who liked poetry and warm coffee and quiet places. She rarely mentioned her children. It wasn't shame or secrecy, it was survival. Most days she could function. She would wake up, brew her tea, take a short walk before her shift, then spend the day helping customers find novels they didn't know they needed. She smiled when she had to, nodded when appropriate, but underneath her calm exterior was a woman barely stitched together by threads of will. Even in her calmest hours, a quiet disquiet lived in her chest, a whisper that never truly left her alone. She would hear it in the rustle of paperbacks being shelved, in the soft jingle of the store's bell, in the hush of winter wind against the windows. That whisper said something was wrong. That whisper told her there was more to the story of that fire. She'd buried it for years, dismissed it as the echo of grief twisting her thoughts, but it had never stopped. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when she was too tired to dream and too haunted to sleep, Maria would sit with the reports from that night. Somehow she'd held onto them. Fire department summaries, a police statement, a vague insurance letter. She'd read them dozens of times. Every word was etched into her memory, yet there were lines that always unsettled her. Cause of fire undetermined. No clear signs of electrical malfunction. The nursery area was inaccessible due to structural collapse. Recovery of remains was minimal. Minimal. That word lingered like smoke. There had never been a definitive answer about how the fire started. Nor had she been allowed to see her children's bodies, only given cremated remains that, she was told, had been found in the debris. At the time, she was too shattered to question. But as the years passed, the questions grew louder. She remembered something small, something strange. A van, parked across the street that night, engine running. She'd seen it earlier in the evening while taking out the trash. 2 people inside, not from the neighborhood. She'd thought nothing of it then. Now, she remembered the way the driver had looked at her house. That detail had resurfaced a year ago in a dream and wouldn't let go. She even went so far as to search online for old police records, but found nothing helpful. Her inquiries led to dead ends. The fire had been deemed accidental. Case closed. Life moved on, except for hers. And then there were the dreams. They had started not long after the 2nd anniversary of the fire. In them, she would see Lily and Lucas, not as babies, but as toddlers, or older, standing at a distance, calling for her. She could never reach them. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of their laughter or cries lingering in the dark. At first, she thought they were manifestations of grief, her mind's cruel trick. But over time, the dreams became more vivid, more detailed. The children looked so real. They had aged. She could see Lucas's gap-toothed smile and Lily's brown eyes filled with mischief. And always, they were together. One day at the bookstore, a customer had walked in with twins. A boy and a girl around 5 or 6. Maria's chest clenched so suddenly she had to grip the counter. It wasn't just that they were twins, it was that the boy looked so much like Lucas it made her dizzy. Same curls, same lopsided grin. The girl clung to her mother's coat, just like Lily had once done. Maria had to excuse herself and cry in the back room. After that, she began watching children more closely, often against her will. A glimpse at the park, at the market, in passing cars. Sometimes her eyes played tricks. Sometimes they didn't. And each time she saw a set of twins, that whisper in her chest grew louder. Then came the day she finally admitted it to herself, not out loud, not to anyone, but quietly, in the mirror one morning. I don't think they died. The words came with a gasp, like surfacing from deep water. She stared at her reflection, waiting for the rational part of her to take over, to remind her of grief's cruel games. But it didn't. Instead, she remembered another odd detail. The fire door to the nursery had been closed when she woke. She had never closed it. She always left it cracked open to hear the twins breathing. Who closed it? When? Why? She began looking for answers in places no one else would. She searched online forums about unsolved fires. She connected with others who had lost children in suspicious circumstances. She even contacted a retired investigator she found through a support group, who agreed to review her case unofficially. He found it strange that the fire marshal's notes lacked depth. Sloppy, he said. Like someone wanted it wrapped up fast. That gave her chills. Could it be possible? Had someone taken them? It seemed impossible, but Maria clung to the idea with equal parts desperation and dread. Because if it were true, if her twins had been taken and not killed, then she had not failed them. She had not lost them. But then a darker thought followed. If they were alive, where were they? Were they safe? Were they loved? Did they miss her? She didn't share these thoughts with anyone. Who would believe her? She didn't even know if she believed herself. But something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she began to hope. Not fully, not freely, but enough to stay up late scrolling missing child databases. Enough to memorize the faces of young twins listed in reports. Enough to dream not only of the past but of a possible future, where she might find them again. Or at least the truth. Because Maria had lived too long in shadows. And though she feared what she might uncover, she feared even more never knowing at all. It was an ordinary afternoon cloaked in the usual hush of winter when Maria found herself at the airport, waiting for a delayed flight. The bookstore where she worked had given her time off for the holidays, though she hadn't asked for it. Her coworkers meant well, they always did, but they still didn't understand that Christmas wasn't a season of joy for her. It was a grave marker, a reminder of what she had lost. She had planned a short trip to a coastal town a few hours away, not because she was eager to celebrate but because she wanted to escape the season entirely. She thought maybe the sound of waves might drown out the old memories that always threatened to swallow her this time of year. The terminal was bustling in that peculiar way airports always are, families juggling luggage and tired children, couples whispering goodbyes, business travelers tapping on keyboards. Maria sat near gate 17, wrapped in a thick scarf and holding a cup of lukewarm tea. She had positioned herself away from the crowd, close enough to hear boarding announcements but distant enough to be alone. She watched people absent-mindedly, an old habit she'd picked up from years of working in retail. Sometimes people watching was a comfort, a gentle distraction. Today, it was just background noise. But then something pulled her attention, no, more than that. Something snapped her into awareness like a taut wire. It was laughter, light and sweet, like wind chimes on a spring day. Not just any laughter. Children. Two of them. A boy and a girl. She didn't turn right away. Something inside her stiffened, uncertain whether she could face the familiar pain that always struck when she saw twins. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to ignore it. But the sound came again, closer now, floating through the air like a memory. She turned her head slowly toward the source. There they were, two children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 years old. They were seated a few rows down with backpacks and small roller suitcases. The girl had long chestnut hair tied in a ponytail that bounced when she moved. The boy had a head full of dark curls and a grin that split his face wide. They were sharing a snack, giggling at something on a tablet between them. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just that they were twins, it was them. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs, the sound of it rising above the background noise, above the announcements and laughter and rolling suitcases. She stared, frozen. The boy looked exactly like Lucas, his curls, his eyes, his mischievous dimple on one cheek. The girl was Lily to the bone, the arch of her brow, the serious way she focused on the screen, the way her mouth twisted to one side when she was thinking. She didn't just recognize them. She knew them. Maria blinked hard, her mind spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be another trick of grief, another hallucination born from too many dreams and too little closure. She stood slowly, unsure if her legs would support her. The children laughed again, and the sound burrowed into her chest like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. They were wearing matching jackets, red and navy blue, with little patches on the sleeves. As she took a hesitant step closer, something even more shocking happened. The girl looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, time slowed. The girl's expression changed, her mouth slightly open as if she were trying to place Maria's face. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, an instinctive pause that made Maria's breath hitch. But before anything else could happen, a woman returned from the nearby cafe and hurried toward the twins. She looked to be in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a tight smile. "Come on," the woman said briskly. "We'll be boarding soon." The woman's voice pulled Maria out of her daze. She stepped closer, carefully, cautiously, her hands trembling. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft, barely audible over the chatter around them. The woman looked up, startled. "Yes?" she asked, defensive at once. She stood slightly in front of the children, subtly shielding them. "I'm sorry," Maria said, trying to steady herself. I just couldn't help but notice your children. They remind me of someone." The woman's eyes narrowed. "They're not mine," she said quickly. "I'm their guardian. Their mother passed away." Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, too precise. Maria's stomach flipped. "Do you mind if I ask their names?" Maria said. Her voice was shaking now. The woman paused, calculating. "This is Anna and Leo," she replied, motioning to the children. Maria's mind reeled. Lily and Lucas. Anna and Leo. The initials were the same. She could barely breathe. Her instinct screamed. She didn't know how, and she didn't know why, but every fiber of her being told her, "These are my children." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, we have to get going." Before Maria could speak again, the children were ushered away. But not before the boy, Leo, looked back over his shoulder. For a split second, his eyes met Maria's. And he smiled. A soft, familiar, almost longing smile. Like he knew her. Maria stood there, shaking, watching them disappear into the gate line. She wanted to chase them, to scream, to demand answers, but her body wouldn't move. Her heart was pounding so loudly she thought she might faint. Was she imagining things? Could grief really mimic something so real? Or had her heart, buried in pain for 6 years, just found a beat of hope? In that moment, doubt and certainty crashed together like thunder inside her. But one thing was clear, something wasn't right. And Maria, for the first time in years, felt the quiet embers of a fire long extinguished flicker to life again, not of destruction but of determination. She didn't know what she'd just witnessed. But she knew one thing beyond all reason or fear. She had seen her children. And she wasn't going to stop until she knew the truth. Maria didn't sleep that night. Her mind, normally dulled by years of grief and silence, now burned with something sharp, electric, like a wire suddenly live after years of lying dormant. She sat in the tiny kitchen of her apartment, the soft ticking of the wall clock the only sound in the room, the cup of tea in her hand long gone cold. She replayed every second of what had happened at the airport, every glance, every word, every gesture from the woman who called herself the children's guardian. The way the girl had looked at her. The way the boy had smiled. That smile had gutted her. It wasn't just recognition. It was memory. She spread out everything she had on her small table. Newspaper clippings, the sparse fire report, the hospital discharge papers, photos of Lily and Lucas, burned at the edges but still precious beyond words. She dug out the police incident report she had filed after the fire. She had read it hundreds of times before, but now she noticed something she hadn't before, or perhaps she hadn't let herself notice. There was no concrete confirmation that the remains they found belonged to her children. The coroner's report used cautious, hedged language, believed to be the remains of 2 infants, inconclusive due to high temperature exposure. No DNA confirmation. No personal items recovered. Nothing definitive. Her heart pounded as she stared at those words. She had accepted what they told her because she had wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. The alternative had been too cruel to face. But now, with what she'd seen at the airport, that cruelty seemed more like a cover for something far worse. Her children had not died in that fire. She knew it. And if they had lived, someone had taken them. She didn't know where to begin, but she knew she couldn't do this alone. She pulled out the business card the retired investigator, Roy Hartman, had given her a year ago. She had contacted him once before, in the haze of her suspicions, but had never followed through. The card was worn now, bent at the edges from her picking it up and putting it down countless times. She stared at it, then picked up the phone and dialed. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hartman." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "This is Maria Cortez. I don't know if you remember." "I remember," he said immediately. "The house fire. The twins." She exhaled shakily. "I think I saw them yesterday. At the airport. Alive." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Tell me everything." They met the next morning in a quiet diner outside the city. Maria recounted every detail, watching his expression shift from polite skepticism to wary interest, and finally to deep concern. She showed him the photo of her children. Described the woman. The twins' appearance. Their behavior. Everything. Hartman listened intently, scribbling in a worn notebook. "You're sure it was them?" Maria nodded. "I felt it. In my bones. They didn't just look like Lily and Lucas. They were them. I don't know how I know. I just do." Hartman didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He leaned back in the booth and rubbed his jaw. "There are cases," he said slowly, "rare ones. Child abduction disguised by fire. It's not common, but it has happened. Especially when someone wants to disappear with kids. Then I need to find them, Maria said, her voice firm, laced with a kind of steel she hadn't felt in years. Hartman nodded. Do you remember the flight number or destination? She did. She had seen the gate sign, Flight 482 to Denver. Good, he said. We can start there. Surveillance footage. Passenger lists. Maybe we can trace the woman, find out who she is. As he spoke, Maria's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel for 6 long years. It felt dangerous, exhilarating, terrifying. The next few days blurred into motion. Hartman worked his old contacts, digging up flight records, requesting camera footage under a freelance investigator license. Maria watched the hours pass, torn between desperation and dread. What if they were wrong? What if she had imagined it all? Or worse, what if she was right, and her children had been alive all along, taken from her, raised by strangers, and they didn't even remember her? Late one evening, Hartman called. I have a name, he said. Judy Marlin. She boarded that flight with 2 children, Leo and Anna, just like she told you. But here's the strange part. There's no birth certificates for either of them under those names. No adoption records. Just forged documents that look real enough to pass airport checks. Maria's heart stilled. What does that mean? It means she may not be their legal guardian, he said. And if she isn't, she's got a lot to hide. The next step was clear, they had to go to Denver. Maria didn't hesitate. She booked the first flight out. She didn't know what she'd find there, but she knew what she had to do. She'd packed only the essentials, her photo of the twins, the locket with their hair, her determination. On the flight, she stared out the window at the clouded sky, thinking of Lily and Lucas, of what they might have become. Did they still laugh the same way? Did they remember her voice, her scent, the way she sang them to sleep? What had they been told? That their mother had died. That she didn't want them. She clenched her fists and made a vow. She would find them. She would bring them home. And no one, not fire, not lies, not the passage of time, would stop her now. Maria stepped off the plane into the crisp Denver air, the city buzzing with a strange energy that felt both foreign and urgent. Her heart pounded not just from the flight but from the weight of what she was about to do. The moment she had longed for, finding her children, was now within reach, and yet it felt overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean with no clear path across. She clutched her small bag tightly, inside which were the few keepsakes she had of Lily and Lucas, a faded photograph, a tiny bracelet, and a locket with a lock of their hair. These fragile tokens were all that connected her to a past she had tried to bury but never could forget. Every step toward the baggage claim was heavy with memories and hope intertwined. Her first stop was the address Hartman had uncovered, an inconspicuous townhouse in a quiet Denver neighborhood. She had spent hours scrolling through satellite maps and reading online reviews to familiarize herself with the place, but nothing could prepare her for standing in front of the real house. The brick facade was neat, with a small garden in front and a porch swaying slightly in the breeze. It looked ordinary, safe even, but she knew it hid secrets. Before approaching, Maria took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't just a grieving mother anymore, she was a woman on a mission, driven by a fierce need for truth and reunion. The doorbell was cold beneath her fingers, and she pressed it hesitantly. A few moments later, the door opened. The woman from the airport, Judy Marlin, stood there, her sharp eyes quickly assessing Maria. She looked surprised but guarded. Maria forced her voice to be calm and steady. I'm Maria Cortez. I believe you have my children. Judy's face hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. Maria swallowed her fear. Leo and Anna, they are my twins. Lily and Lucas. You have them. Judy's eyes flickered for a moment, a crack in her armor, but she quickly closed it. You're mistaken. Maria's chest tightened. I saw them at the airport. I spoke to you there. I know they're my children. Judy sighed and stepped aside, motioning Maria in. Come inside. We need to talk. Inside, the house was meticulously clean but felt cold and impersonal. Judy led Maria to a small living room where 2 children were quietly drawing at a low table. Their heads bent in concentration, they didn't notice the tension hanging in the air. Maria's heart ached. These were her children, her Lily and Lucas, yet they were strangers now. She knelt down, her voice trembling. Lily. Lucas. It's me, Mom. The children looked up, eyes wide and curious but also wary. They didn't move toward her. Judy watched silently from the doorway. Where have you been? Maria whispered, tears blurring her vision. Why didn't you come back to me? Judy cleared her throat. They're safe here. Their mother passed away. I'm their guardian now. Maria's mind raced. Questions flooded her. Why had Judy taken them? What had happened in those 6 years? And most importantly, did Lily and Lucas know the truth about who she was? Over the next hours, Maria and Judy talked cautiously, exchanging stories that didn't quite line up. Judy claimed the children had been abandoned and that she had found them alone and vulnerable after the fire. Maria knew the fire had been a cover-up, her instinct screamed it, and that Judy was hiding something bigger. The children remained distant but occasionally glanced at Maria with flickers of recognition, small signs that tore at her heart. She promised herself she would be patient, that she would earn their trust slowly. As evening fell, Maria left the house, her spirit bruised but not broken. She knew this was only the beginning. The path ahead was tangled with shadows, lies, and danger, but also hope. She would fight for her family. She would uncover the truth. Because now, after 6 years of silence and sorrow, the pieces were finally moving. And Maria was ready to follow wherever they led. Maria returned to her small rented room that evening, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her chest. The air was thin and cold outside, and the city's hum felt distant behind the closed windows. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the worn photograph of Lily and Lucas. Their innocent faces smiled back at her, a bittersweet reminder of a past that felt both painfully close and achingly distant. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, marking time that seemed both urgent and cruelly slow. She replayed every moment from her visit to Judy's house. The guarded expressions, the children's cautious glances, the strange calm Judy maintained despite the storm brewing inside Maria's heart. Nothing made sense. The story Judy told, that the twins had been found abandoned after the fire, felt like a lie wrapped in half-truths. Maria's instinct screamed that the fire had been more than an accident and that someone had deliberately taken her children. But why? And who? Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone. It was Hartman. Relief flooded her. She answered quickly. Maria, he said in a low voice, I've been digging into Judy Marlin. There's something you need to know. She has a history. What kind of history? Maria asked, clutching the phone tighter. Fraud, identity theft, child custody disputes, Hartman replied grimly. She's been involved in several suspicious cases over the past decade. And it gets worse, there's an old case from another state where she disappeared with 2 children for years before resurfacing. The details are vague, but the pattern is clear. Maria's breath caught. So she's been moving with kids, hiding them. Exactly, Hartman said. She's good at covering her tracks, but I think you've stumbled onto something big. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The woman who held her children wasn't just a guardian, she was a criminal. But what was her motive? And more urgently, how could Maria get her children back without putting them in danger? Hartman continued, I'm working on getting you legal access, documents, custody rights, anything that can help. But this might get messy. Judy's not going to give up those kids easily. Maria nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I understand. I'm ready. After hanging up, Maria's thoughts turned to the twins. She had to be careful. She wanted to protect them, to build trust slowly. She couldn't rush or scare them away. She thought about what she could offer them. Safety, love, the truth. Over the next days, Maria spent hours walking around the neighborhood, watching the children from a distance. She observed their routines, their interactions, the small things that reminded her so deeply of her own children. Lucas's habit of tapping his fingers when nervous, Lily's way of tilting her head when curious. Every detail was a thread connecting her to the family she had lost. One afternoon, as the twins played in a nearby park, Maria approached slowly, kneeling down and showing them a small photo of herself holding them as babies. Do you know who this is? She asked softly. Leo and Anna looked at the photo, then back at her, confusion flickering in their eyes. The moment was fragile, suspended between recognition and fear. Anna whispered, Mom. Maria's heart shattered and soared at once. Yes, sweetie. It's me. They didn't run away. They didn't hug her either. But the small crack in their defenses was enough. hope enough to keep Maria fighting. That night, she sat by the window, gazing out at the stars. The road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but she had found her children. And now, she would stop at nothing to bring them home. The days following Maria's tentative contact with the twins were filled with a turbulent mix of hope, fear, and determination. Each morning, she woke with a restless energy, driven by the fierce need to unravel the tangled web of lies and secrets that had kept her children away for so long. She spent hours speaking with Hartman, poring over legal documents, and consulting with child advocacy groups. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Judy Marlin was a master manipulator who had constructed a fragile facade to hide her true intentions. Maria knew she had to be strategic. The last thing she wanted was to frighten Leo and Anna, or worse, provoke Judy into fleeing with them again. Every move had to be careful, deliberate. She decided to enroll in the same community center near the twins' home, volunteering in children's activities to get closer to them in a safe, non-threatening way. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but Maria found solace in the small moments, the tentative smiles from Leo, the shy glances from Anna, the way they occasionally sought her out during playtime. One chilly afternoon, Maria sat on a bench at the park, watching the twins play with other children. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows and bathing the world in golden light. She noticed how much they had grown, how their laughter, light and unguarded, reminded her so much of her own memories. It was almost too much to bear. The years lost, the milestones missed, the birthdays uncelebrated. But she refused to let the pain consume her. She reminded herself every day that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rebuild what had been stolen. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. While helping organize a community event, Maria overheard a conversation between two women at a nearby table. They mentioned Judy Marlin in hushed tones, one woman whispering about a recent suspicious activity, a late-night move of some belongings from the townhouse to a storage unit outside the city. Maria's pulse quickened. This was the chance she had been waiting for. With Hartman's help, she obtained the address of the storage facility. Late one evening, under the cover of darkness, Maria and Hartman drove to the location. The air was crisp, filled with the distant sounds of the city settling into night. They approached the unit cautiously, their breath visible in the cold air. Inside the storage unit, amid boxes and dusty furniture, they found a trove of evidence, photos, documents, journals, all chronicling Judy's years of deception. Among the papers were birth certificates, falsified adoption papers, and even notes that hinted at a sinister motive. Judy had stolen the twins after the fire to claim a financial settlement from a mysterious benefactor. It was a web of lies and greed that had ensnared Maria's children. As Maria sifted through the documents, a deep resolve settled within her. The fight ahead would be hard, but now she had the proof to challenge Judy's custody claims. More importantly, she had the knowledge to protect Lily and Lucas from a future built on lies. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional reunions. Maria met with child psychologists to ensure the twins' transition would be gentle and supportive. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. Leo, still holding onto his guarded nature, and Anna, more curious and tentative, started to respond to her presence with growing warmth. One afternoon, as snow began to fall softly outside, the three of them sat by the fireplace in Maria's modest apartment. The children nestled close, their small hands finding hers as she read aloud from a worn storybook. It was the first time in years that Maria felt a sense of peace, a fragile but powerful reminder that love, though tested by time and tragedy, could endure. Maria knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, questions to answer, wounds to heal, and a family to rebuild. But in that quiet moment, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of her children, she dared to hope. The fire that once tore them apart had finally given way to a new beginning, forged in the unbreakable bond of a mother's love.